Japan, 1944. On the tropical island of Saipan, thousands of civilians chose to hurl themselves into the void rather than surrender. With the United States as its foe in World War II, Japan sought to contain American fury and defend a key stronghold. This was the last echo of a people who considered defeat worse than death. Today, we revisit the story of the Battle of Saipan, where samurai honor collided with the war machine and lost. The Battle of Saipan was fundamental to the course of World War II. The fighting lasted from June 15th to July 9th, 1944. Its ferocity stemmed from the fact that both Japan and the United States recognized Saipan as the last barrier preventing the subjugation of the Japanese nation. Decades earlier, in 1899, the American government received an offer from Spain to sell the island. Washington rejected it, so the territory remained in the hands of Kaiser Wilhelm II, ruler of Germany. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles granted Saipan to Japan. Years later, the Americans grasped the importance of that position in the Pacific, setting the stage for a bloody confrontation.
If the U.S. can capture Saipan, the island will offer an ideal base for U.S. Army B-29 Superfortress bombers. From here, the massive warplanes could begin strategic bombing of the home islands.
The assault on Saipan was part of Operation Forager, the Marianas and Palau Islands campaign. U.S. forces fielded 8 Marine regiments and 3 infantry regiments. Altogether, the United States Army deployed 127,000 personnel and 535 ships. Morale was high. The Normandy landings had occurred 10 days before the operation began. On June 6, 1944, while they were at sea, officers informed their subordinates, "The invasion of France has begun." The soldiers erupted with joy and, in a way, believed the conquest of Saipan would be easy. They had no idea they were heading into a great slaughter. Saipan had been heavily militarized by Japan. It housed a garrison of the 4th Fleet, commanded by Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, a decisive figure in the 1941 strike on Pearl Harbor who, after his failure at Midway, was assigned to defend the Marianas, far from the main formations of the Imperial Japanese Navy. The Japanese 31st Army arrived under General Yoshitsugu Saito, supported by aircraft from the 14th Air Fleet. In all, Japan assembled 31,000 personnel, 25,000 soldiers, and 6,000 sailors. Beyond the military presence, thousands of settlers from Japan had lived on Saipan since the 1920s. They coexisted with the island's indigenous people, the Chamorro, who showed little interest in World War II. There was no escape because on June 15, 1944, the Americans landed on Saipan. At 6 a.m., the 2nd Marine Division approached in 300 LVT landing craft to the north of Saipan, near Tanapag. The Japanese assumed the landing would be there and shifted many units from the center of the island to the northern sector. They had been deceived. The Americans turned and sailed several kilometers south, putting the Marines ashore on an empty beach. The 4th Marine Division did the same in the south, landing on another vacant coast. In short order, 8,000 U.S. troops were put ashore without difficulty.
Then 150 carrier planes take the battle up close. Braving return fire, they pound the beaches to soften them up for the landing. The plan calls for the first wave of troops to land at 0830, with many waves to follow.
A few hours later, the 2nd Marine Division pushed about 450 meters inland, where Japanese troops lay in wait, camouflaged in the vegetation. Using surprise, they left their shelters and opened fire on the unsuspecting Marines. The same fate hit the 4th Marine Division not far from their comrades, as Japanese artillery hammered them mercilessly.
It's a very long day, and for some, their last. There are 2,000 dead and injured. The Marines have made their first sacrifices on Saipan. The Navy is next.
On June 16, 1944, reserve troops came ashore, a Marine detachment, artillery batteries, and the 125th Infantry Regiment, 20,000 men in all. The fresh force gave the Americans an edge. They overran thin Japanese defenses and linked the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions. Even so, this advance was intolerable to Japanese military pride, and a fierce response followed. More than 2,000 fighters carried out 2 suicidal counterattacks at Garapan and Charan-Kanoa. They achieved nothing. Sherman tanks cut them down, killing 700 Japanese in a single blow. The next day, the 4th Marine Division seized the eastern shore of Lake Susupe. It was no simple task. They had to contend with 44 Hago tanks, which inflicted numerous casualties on the Americans. US artillery and armor answered in kind, destroying 24 Japanese tanks. The clash was blood-soaked. June 18, 1944. A decisive day, the assault on Aslito airfield. To advance on the field, the 24th Marines moved on the left, the 25th in the center, and the 165th on the right. For the Japanese, retreat became mandatory. Had they not pulled back, they would have been encircled, and they still had to defend the mountainous center of the island. Aslito airfield was left under the care of the 4th Marine Division. 6 days later, on June 24, 1944, the 2nd Marine Division moved along the opposite face of Mount Tapotchau. Their objective was the Kagman Peninsula, which opened a gap between their formation and the advance of the 27th Infantry Division. The Japanese exploited the separation, slipping into enemy trenches to kill dozens of Americans and wreck their weapons. Later, Japanese teams moved underground through caves to devastate the lines of the 105th Infantry Regiment and force its soldiers to flee. As a result, they reached the runway at Aslito Airfield, destroyed a P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bomber, damaged 2 others, and killed American guards. After that disaster, US forces hunted the infiltrators down one by one. At the beginning of July 1944, American troops gained ground more quickly. The 2nd Marine Division took the town of Garapan, prompting 3,000 Japanese personnel to flee. On July 4, 1944, the 27th Infantry Division and the 4th Marine Division cleared caves and holes by detonating grenades inside them or burning their entrances with flamethrowers. That led to the capture of the town of Tanapag. The Americans' successive successes and the tightening net that prevented Japanese movement drove Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo to commit seppuku, ritual suicide. Every meter gained was hell. Saipan did not surrender. It burned. On July 7, 1944, more than 3,000 Japanese launched a banzai charge, a suicidal attack against the 105th Infantry Regiment and the 10th Marine Regiment. The order came from General Saito, who urged his men to die with honor. They surged forward, and Americans fell under the shock of surprise. Artillery never had a chance to respond, so the Japanese overran the trenches. The attackers used whatever they had at hand: katanas, bayonets, and bare hands. In total, 4,311 Japanese died, while the Americans suffered 667 dead and 377 wounded. It was the most devastating banzai charge of the war. It was certain death, and they knew it, but they preferred to die fighting rather than live defeated. July 9, 1944. When the Banzai charge ended, the 27th Infantry Division and the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions controlled almost all of Saipan. What the American soldiers witnessed on their way toward Punta Marpi was macabre. In every village they entered, they found entire Japanese families who had taken their own lives by stabbing themselves or shooting themselves in the head. In other cases, Japanese soldiers blew up the houses of family groups who refused to commit suicide. Not only that, at 2 points in northern Saipan, Ladaran Banadero and Banzai Cliff, mothers with small children and babies hurled themselves from 70-meter cliffs. Although the Americans waved for them not to jump, the women ignored them. On several occasions, the cries of those who survived the fall were so harrowing that American troops ended their suffering with gunfire. That was the consequence of the Japanese Empire's terror propaganda, which demonized Americans as sadistic torturers. Saipan was the prelude to a new horror. The enemy was worse than death. The island became a cemetery. From this tragedy, around 9,000 civilian deaths were counted. By the end of the battle, the United States suffered 16,487 casualties, with 3,426 dead and 13,061 wounded. On the side of the Empire of Japan, there were 30,811 dead, 23,811 military personnel, and 7,000 civilians. Thanks to the conquest of Saipan, the United States established air bases at that strategic point in the Marianas, launching flights to bomb cities on the Japanese home islands. It was a decisive stage in the Pacific War, directly connected to the subsequent fall of the Empire of Japan. A direct political consequence of the military failure was the resignation of Japan's Prime Minister, Hideki Tojo. He had implemented expansionist war policies, so stepping aside implied adopting defensive positions within the Japanese domains. The loss of Saipan exposed to Japan's citizens the real possibility of imperial defeat. These events marked the beginning of the end of the Pacific War. From the Marianas, the flights that dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki took off. On Saipan, honor prevailed over life, and the Japanese people found their grave. A small island that bore the weight of a dying empire. That's all for today's video. If you enjoyed it, we invite you to subscribe so you don't miss any content from military history.